sampling. Now, that doesn't seem like a very complex process, but there's a lot of little nuances there that you want to be aware of to make sure that you're getting correct and accurate readings. First things first is sanitization. So, anytime that we're going to open the fermenter, whether it's a bucket, whether, it's a big mouth bubbler, carboy, whatever it happens to be, is just make sure anything that's coming in contact with beer that's post-boil is, you're being sanitary. Anything in the boil, dip the neighbor's cat in it, you're fine, good to go. But first things first, I like to go ahead and clean the port. If we were doing, say, a yeast sample, pulling off a slug of yeast that we want to keep around, I would say, go ahead and introduce a torch in addition, to our to our Star San spray. But being that we're just pulling gravity and pH today, sorry, we'll try to do this half backwards here. So, I guess the first thing that we want to note is the volume in which we're pulling off. And the reason I note volume is anytime that we're opening this fermenter or we're taking volume out of it, we have the chance of sucking in oxygen. And a beer that's already fully fermented out, we don't want that oxygen in contact with the beer. So an idea that I kind of ripped off from the guys at the Brulosophy group was they were taking Mylar bags, and then when they were cold crashing their beers, or taking samples, they'd actually affix this Mylar balloon full of CO2 up here, and basically when you're pulling off volume here, rather than sucking through your bubbler, or even potentially sucking fluid from your bubbler, God forbid you got a fruit fly in there or something, it actually just pulls from this CO2 bag. So I've got that hooked up, ready to go. What I like to do is pull off, keep a little shot glass around. Reason being is sometimes, on say a murky, hazy IPA, there's a good chance you got, a yeast slug in there. You might have, a bunch of hop material. So this is that first little sample I'll pull off. Set it aside. And now, when I said volume, you're looking at maybe 100 milliliters somewhere in there. So we're going to kind of just go just up to the bottom of here. See, we're pulling off the bottom here. There we go. So that's about all you really need. And the reason being is your hydrometer, tube, I prefer to use this little shipping container just so it's less volume. If you do, use the larger style, go ahead and make a mark of what that minimum volume should be. And the reason being is you don't want to overshoot or undershoot. So now that we've got our volume, first thing that I like to do is test temperature, and I want to do that as quickly as possible because the glass itself will actually warm up the beer some. In the case of this beer, it's currently cold crashing. So give it a second here. Let's stabilize 5.2. So that's about 41 degrees. And that aligns, and the reason you want to do that is so you're actually knowing what your set temperature is. In this case, we have a set temperature of 7.8. So just knowing that difference, whether it's a glycol system, whether it's a bucket in your deep freeze, or even just the beer that's in your closet, because as we know, actively fermenting beer at 70 degrees ambient could be as high as 78, 80 degrees actually in the wort. So 44 degrees seems good to me. I know some of you guys out there use these guys, a little pyrometer, infrared thermometers. They're good, but you do need to know that when you are checking the temperature of something, it needs to be a matte surface. So just an example I'll show you here. This is reading 74 degrees. If this was just the side of my conical that's exposed, okay, 74 degrees, that's great. But if you actually do it on the black surface, we're now 68 degrees. So there is a difference in what it reads, and it needs a flat black material in order to make that reading. So we've got our sample here. We did our temperature, and the temperature is also good to note because when we do take our hydrometer reading, there is a correction factor in there as well. So to that note, there is a lot of software out there you can get for your phones, free stuff. What's it? Brewfather is a good one. It's got a hydrometer correction, in there. Plug in, your actual temperature, plug in the gravity, and it'll give you that corrected value. So now our next one is degassing. We don't want to just necessarily stick our pH meter in this because there is residual CO2, whether this is an active fermenting beer or even, it's already hit terminal. So what we want to do is degas. There are a couple methods. You could run it through a coffee filter, or you could, sit here and just pour back and forth. And that... Get real fancy here. Ooh, now we're just making this. Alright, so what we'll do is we'll take our cap off our pH meter, fire it up. I usually like to note whatever the pH is in the initial reading. There is a storage solution that's in there, and I kind of know what its pH value is. So that way I know either if the fluid's been, or the pH solution's been diluted from maybe putting away a wet hydrometer with tap water, or if it needs calibration. So take it out. I like to give it a good shake here, make sure no bubbles in your actual sensor, that little element there. And then we're going to go ahead, plop that in here, and while that's sitting, we'll do what we were talking about, sanitize everything. I like to take off the sampling port. Reason being, it's really hard to get the fluid all the way up inside to ensure that you've totally cleaned out that port. It doesn't take more than a second to drop this stuff off, and give it a good blast in there. If you want, take a look in a flashlight, make sure you don't have any hot material. And this applies just to those plastic valves that you would use on a bucket. If you are using like a big mouth bubbler or something, look up closed transfer, and you can use some of those methods of actually pressurizing the device to pull your samples without inducing oxygen. So there's a lot of cool tricks out there, tips and tricks that guys have come up with. Homebrewers are extremely innovative group, so I always like to see what it is. This is also a good time to start taking your notes, and those are visual, visual cues, aromatics, tastes. So if we were brewing a crispy boy lager and this is what we're seeing, well, probably we want to note that because we've either got some sort of active fermentation going, we had something in the brew process, maybe I don't know, a ton of flaked oats or wheat in there, and you don't want that. So going after aromatics, taste, noting this stuff. You don't need to get super detailed. Beers like this, I'll do a fermentation curve on, so basically a daily sample, roughly same time of the day. And the reason being is this was a Kvike beer with the new Juggernaut, and I wanted to see how quickly it was pulling down the terminal and what that curve was and what the pH was. As Levi from Long Beach Beer Lab has a lot of notes out there on the Milk the Funk forum on how pH is important to Kvike beers. So we've got a rough pH here of 4.66, it looks like, at 60 degrees. That'll probably continue to fall a little bit. But now that we've degassed, we've taken our pH reading. Get this guy cleaned up real quick. Now we can get into our gravity. So just like before, one thing I didn't note is that if you are, say, cleaning your glassware or something with Star San ahead of time, make sure it's dry. The reason being is Star San's got a really low pH. Even in this small sample size, if we have a few drops in there, that'll skew our results. So just be aware of that. Now what we're doing here is simply pouring it in. Just about enough. I like pouring it all the way to the brim and then going to get rid of my bubbles. So obviously our temperature, I think we said, what was that, 66 or 40 something? It's gonna be, we're gonna have to correct for that because this guy, wow, we actually dried up real nice. So this is 1010 is what we're reading right now. That's probably more about 1009 if I remember the correction correctly. And that's about it, guys. I mean, that's typical sampling. So we touched on the volume. We touched on CO2 suckback. Limiting your hydrometer size or that sample size, temperature. Why that's important for not only your hydrometer correction, but also making sure that your system is where it's supposed to be. If you've got a deep freeze that's set at 32 and you're taking samples at 47, maybe there's something wrong with the deep freeze. Maybe there's something else going on. Then we got degassing, so through a coffee filter, pouring back and forth method. And then obviously taking our visual and aromatic notes. So I mean, this is hazy IPA, super pina, pineapple. It's like you just freshly cut right in the side of a pineapple. You can do taste, but a lot of times you're gonna still have some hot material in there. It's gonna add some bitterness, but make those notes, and it's whatever comes to your mind first. Smell the beer. Does it smell like a fresh can of tennis balls? Note that. I mean, does it smell oaty? That may be something that goes away, but these are your notes, and these are when you look back on this beer and say, oh man, there's something I just I couldn't put my finger on, but you're able to revisit those and go, oh, okay, yeah, it did really shape pina. Maybe we back off, I don't know, the Azaka, hop to half an ounce instead of 3 ounces in Whirlpool. We also touched on pH and then gravity and taking the logs. So hope that's helpful to you guys. If you've got any suggestions, put them down below. If I misspoke, put them down below and I'll put a correction in there. We'll touch on all sorts of other things, closed transfers, vicinal diketone tests, forced fermentation tests, you name it. If you guys got an idea, send it to me. I'm happy to hear them. Cheers.